In this video, I will show you how to deploy and publish your cartridge to an Annotator for Clinical Data production instance for use in an application. I will be using the Lupus cartridge that has been used in several other videos. Once I've decided that my model is ready to be used by my application, I will publish my cartridge into a version. This can be done either on the main page under the cartridge information at the Publish button here, or in edit mode. Clicking into edit mode, you can see the Publish button on the top right, which is what I will select now. Versioning allows you to create multiple states of your cartridge. So if I publish into a version and then want to make new changes and save this state of my cartridge, I can publish into a new version. And then I will have multiple different versions to maintain the state of my cartridge over time. As of right now, I don't have any versions, so I'll be publishing into a new version. When publishing, you're able to select which flows you would like to include in that cartridge. The default flow is the one that is generated based on the artifacts in your cartridge, which I don't need in this case, as I have a custom flow that I've already saved called Lupus Flow. I will then select Publish, and you can see that the cartridge was successfully published to version v10. Now that I've published, I need to deploy this version out into my production instance of ACD. Again, the deploy button is in the top right next to publish, or if you are on the main cartridge page, it is also in the cartridge information. Selecting deploy pops up a modal where you're able to select what version of your cartridge you are going to deploy. The working version of your cartridge, the first option here, is the development version, which constantly updates as you make changes to your cartridge and artifacts in the Annotator for Clinical Data configuration editor. However, I want to use version v10 to deploy. There's also information here telling you when and what time this particular version was published for your informational purposes. I'm going to select v10 to deploy. Right now, the only option to deploy to is the ACD target, which is just your current instance of ACD that is backing the Annotator for Clinical Data configuration editor. However, I'm going to select to add an ACD host and add my ACD production instance that I've already requisitioned. And I'm going to be naming it my ACD host. The URL is then based on the ACD host name, or the ACD host type, excuse me, and I can add a description if I would like. You can see the deploy target information at the bottom has links to the ACD documentation as well as ACD API documentation. And it tells you what URL you will be using when you make API requests to your Annotator for Clinical Data instance. It also tells you the profile and the flow IDs, which you will use when making your API requests. I will then click Deploy, and it will require me to log in to my ACD host using my API key, which I've already copied. This login only needs to be done once within the Annotator for Clinical Data configuration editor, and you can see that the cartridge has been submitted for deployment. You can choose to run this in background if you don't want to sit and wait for the deployment to succeed. Otherwise, it will pop up information to inform you which artifacts have succeeded to deploying. In this case, all of them have succeeded, so my cartridge has been fully successfully deployed. Now that I have published and deployed my cartridge, I can use the preview mode to run text through that version out on the Annotator for Clinical Data instance that I just added. Going into preview mode using the top right, you can see that unstructured text has already been filled in based on my preferred document of Lupus example. You can see that in this case, I'm using the working version to run preview, which, as I mentioned, is just the version of your cartridge that is being constantly updated as you edit it in the configuration editor. Clicking on this, however, opens up a dropdown, which shows you the options, deployed versions of ACD of your cartridge that you can run with. You see that my ACD host is listed here as you have published and deployed your cartridge to that particular host, and you can see that v10 is out there currently. Clicking the little eye icon shows you the deployment status, which again was all successful. I can then choose to run this unstructured text through my production instance of ACD with that v10 version of the cartridge. If I had multiple versions, other versions would be listed here, and I would be able to select those instead. Also, the remove option allows you to remove an ACD host entirely. I will click on the My ACD Host v10 option in this dropdown, and that will then run my text through, as it says at the top now that we have selected it, v10 of this cartridge in My ACD Host. Going back over to the annotators shows you what flows are published and deployed out there with this cartridge. As you can see, it is only my v10 of Lupus Flow, which I selected when I chose to publish the cartridge. You'll notice that you cannot make any changes to these flows. That is because these have already been published and deployed. If you want to make changes, you would have to go back to the working version of your cartridge, change the flow, and then republish your cartridge and redeploy to your ACD host. I can select Lupus Flow v10 here to run that flow with my v10 cartridge and the text here, and you can see the annotations are now different as I have selected the different flow. Now that I have published and deployed my cartridge to production, I can reference it in programmatic requests to the ACD Analyze API. I've actually already created a curl request, which you can see here, to hit the Analyze API of the Annotator for Clinical Data in the instance that I have deployed on my production instance. You can see that it is a curl post request to that Analyze API using the Lupus cartridge v10 Lupus Flow, which again, I pulled that ID from that deploy modal that I showed you earlier. For authorization, I have used my API key, which I have blurred out here for privacy's sake. But here you would be able to put the API key for your particular instance, or you could also use a bearer token. More information on that can be found in the ACD documentation. You can then see that I passed in unstructured text, which is the same text that I had in preview mode, and hitting enter will show you that that post request comes back with all of the annotations in JSON form. So that is how you are able to publish and deploy a version of a cartridge out to an ACD production instance of your choosing.